At 6:30 in the evening on Tuesday, 7th April Eastern Time, there were only 90 minutes left until the deadline of President Trump's final ultimatum to Iran at exactly 8 o'clock that night. That morning, Trump had posted a message that made the whole world hold its breath. An entire civilization would perish tonight, never to return. Everyone was waiting for 8 o'clock. Oil prices were soaring, the stock market was trembling. Middlemen from Pakistan, Egypt and Turkey were desperately making phone calls, and the Iranian president said that 14 million Iranians had already registered, willing to sacrifice themselves for their country. However, at 6:32 p.m., Trump posted an announcement. What happened in those 90 minutes of the 2-week ceasefire? What exactly was the proposal that made Trump nod in agreement and agree to talks? What is America's trump card? Whether Trump will get an even bigger story in 2 weeks' time depends on the fact that behind these US-Iran negotiations, there is a role that hasn't appeared in the news but is absolutely crucial, and that is Beijing. In today's episode, please give me 20 minutes to take you through the behind-the-scenes political drama of the US-Iran negotiations in one go. To understand the turnaround in those 90 minutes, we first need to look back at what happened beforehand. Trump issued 3 ultimatums to Iran, each time setting a deadline, but each time it was postponed. The first was on 21st March, when Trump posted on Truth Social giving Iran 48 hours to open the Strait of Hormuz, or else he would bomb their power plants. And what was the result? 12 hours before the deadline, Trump posted saying that he had had a very good and productive conversation with Iran, so the strike would be suspended for 5 days. The second ultimatum took place on 26 March. That morning, Trump threatened on Truth Social that they had better start taking things seriously or it would be too late. Once it happened, there would be no turning back. By the evening, Trump had changed tack again and, at the request of the Iranian government, suspended the destruction of the power plants for 10 days. The third ultimatum came on 5th April, Easter Sunday, when Trump posted demanding the strait be opened or else you will live in hell. The deadline was set for Tuesday at 8 p.m. But just 90 minutes before 8 o'clock, the situation took its biggest turn yet. Trump announced a 2-week ceasefire. What was really going on beneath the surface of these 3 reversals? Why did Trump repeatedly give Iran a pass? Why the delay? The answer lies within 3 exchanges. After the first 48-hour ultimatum was issued, Pakistan, Egypt and Turkey proactively approached the Americans, offering to mediate. The Americans in turn submitted their own 15-point action list via Pakistan to serve as the framework for a peace agreement. In other words, during this window of opportunity, the US successfully delivered its 15-point proposal to Iran. As for the full text of this 15-point plan, it has not yet been made public, but according to White House spokesperson Levitt and various sources, the core demands include Iran pledging to abandon nuclear weapons. Iran would have to hand over its highly enriched uranium, restrict its missile capabilities, cease funding proxy armed groups, and ensure the safe opening of the strait. In exchange, the United States would consider lifting sanctions and assist Iran with civilian nuclear energy. In other words, this first ultimatum succeeded in bringing Iran back to the negotiating table, and it is believed that Iran's private stance was actually quite positive. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to secure a 5-day respite. However, on the public front, Iran formally rejected the US's 15-point proposal through intermediaries, calling it extremely excessive and unrealistic. This then prompted Trump's second ultimatum. So how did this second ultimatum manage to secure another extension? Because Iran allowed 10 fully laden oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. At that time, traffic through the Strait of Hormuz had almost come to a complete standstill, and 10 oil tankers sailed straight through the middle of the strait in a show of confidence. This was a major gesture of goodwill from Iran to the United States, in exchange for which Trump granted a 10-day extension for negotiations. During these 10 days, intermediaries from Pakistan, Egypt and Turkey were frantically shuttling back and forth. The proposal was revised several times, and while the Iranian government was making private contacts, it continued to repeatedly deny on the official level that it was negotiating with the United States. Just as the deadline of the ultimatum was drawing ever closer, the most dramatic, yet also the most chaotic and bewildering episode of this entire conflict unfolded. An information war broke out. Friends, this part is the most complicated section of today's program. In the final days, as the 10-day deadline approached, Iran, via Pakistani intermediaries, handed a proposal to the United States, putting forward a 10-point plan. At the same time, Pakistan itself proposed a 45-day ceasefire, but Iran rejected this 45-day ceasefire proposal, as what they were seeking was a permanent agreement. However, the pilot scheme proposed by the Iranians themselves was ultimately submitted to the United States. Then came the crucial part. Iran's state media suddenly made the contents of the 10-point plan public. The contents of this plan were as follows. The United States would guarantee not to invade Iran again, recognize Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, and bring an end to all hostile actions in the region, including Israeli military operations in Lebanon. Furthermore, US forces would withdraw from the Middle East and compensate Iran for its war losses. And perhaps the most explosive point was that Iran would retain the right to enrich uranium. As soon as this plan was announced, the whole world was in uproar. CNN reported on it, the New York Times reported on it, but the proposal put forward by Iran was completely at odds with what Trump had always insisted upon. How could Trump possibly accept this as a basis for negotiation and keep making concessions to Iran? Senator Lindsey Graham, after seeing it, said that there were troubling aspects to this plan. Conservative commentator Mark Levin went straight onto X and said it was an absolute disaster. For a moment, it seemed as though the United States had already lost in this negotiation. But is that really the case? The next day, White House spokesperson Levitt completely overturned this narrative at a routine press conference. He said that the initial concrete proposal put forward by Iran was fundamentally unserious and unacceptable and had been completely discarded. This proposal was thrown straight into the bin by Trump and his negotiating team. He then said that many media outlets forcefully reported and incorrectly reported, but this discarded proposal was the one adopted by the United States. As for Trump himself, he later went all out on Truth Social, saying that the version reported by CNN and the New York Times was totally fake. He said that proposal was a fabricated statement linked to a fake news website from Nigeria. CNN responded by saying, well, this was obtained from Iranian officials. It's an authentic document. So what is the truth of the matter? Later, Vance came out and gave the clearest clarification. He said that, in fact, there were 3 different proposals circulating at different points in time, which is why everyone got confused. The second, much more reasonable proposal is the one Trump referred to in his post as a possible basis for negotiation. So the real situation is that different people within Iran were releasing different versions of the proposal. Some came through official diplomatic channels, some were put out by the propaganda machine for domestic audiences, and some were from fringe figures deliberately trying to muddy the waters. Fake news was being released. And as for the so-called mainstream media in the United States, for whatever reason, they simply picked it up and reported it, effectively helping Iran complete the final stretch of this information war. So what was the actual plan for securing a 2-week ceasefire at that point in time? In the hours before 8 p.m. Tuesday, Trump warned civilization was collapsing. Iran urged youth to form human chains and sacrifice themselves for the country. Both sides struck their toughest public poses. However, behind the scenes, events were changing rapidly. The Pakistani Prime Minister, who was responsible for mediation, requested on Tuesday afternoon that Trump extend the deadline by 2 weeks to allow the diplomatic process to run its course. At the same time, the Chief of Staff of the Pakistani military was on separate phone calls with Vance, Spitkoff, and the Iranian Foreign Minister. What about the discussions within the White House? According to US officials, the conversation had shifted from whether we could reach an agreement to whether we could reach one before 8 p.m. tonight, indicating that all the signs were moving in a positive direction. At the final moment, another force became involved. The New York Times later cited 3 Iranian officials as saying that the reason Iran accepted Pakistan's mediated ceasefire proposal at the last minute was because the Chinese Communist Party intervened at the 11th hour, urging Iran to show flexibility and ease tensions. What about Trump after the ceasefire was announced? When interviewed by Agence France Presse, he was also asked whether the Chinese Communist Party had helped to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. Trump replied, "I've heard so, yes." The following day, White House spokesperson Levitt also confirmed this at a press conference, saying that there had been dialogue between the highest levels of the Trump administration and the Chinese government. So in the end, in addition to military pressure, the Chinese Communist Party gave a final push. Iran then put forward a revised proposal that was completely different from the previous one. According to Levitt's own words, as the president's deadline approached and the US military continued to further destroy Iranian targets hour by hour, the Iranian regime recognized the reality and put forward a much more reasonable, completely different and streamlined proposal. And this proposal, he said, could be aligned with our 15-point plan. It was precisely this final proposal that led Trump to press the pause button at 6:32 on Tuesday. Iran was hyping its negotiating position while the American media uncritically echoed it. Consequently, while the media spreads rumors with ease, the White House must scramble to set the record straight. Let's pause here and review the entire timeline. At the first extension, Iran used its posture to regain a chance at negotiations, and the US side took the opportunity to put forward its own bottom line. Thus, negotiations on the 15-point plan commenced. At the second extension, Iran used 10 oil tankers to secure 10 more days from Trump, allowing the proposal to be revised back and forth. For the third time, Trump threatened that civilization would perish, forcing Iran to hand over a negotiable proposal that leaned towards the US position. At this point, we have to address a question. Behind these US-Iran negotiations, what exactly has been Beijing's subtle yet significant role? How has Beijing exerted its influence? Firstly, why does the CCP want a ceasefire? Simply put, China is the largest buyer of Iranian oil, buying 90% of Iran's exports. Furthermore, over 40% of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. If the strait closed for 6 weeks, China would be the world's most anxious nation, especially as Trump has stressed he won't get involved. So who would then secure the strait? We've actually discussed this in a previous episode, so if you missed it, do feel free to go and have a look. So the essence of the CCP pushing for a ceasefire isn't really mediation, it's self-preservation, but that's only half the story. The other half is that the CCP has been secretly propping up Iran throughout this war. Shipping tracking reports have shown that from the outbreak of the war until early April, several vessels flying the Iranian flag departed from Gaolon port in Zhuhai, China, carrying sodium perchlorate. This is a key oxidizer required for ballistic missile propellants. In other words, with Iran's missiles having been almost completely destroyed by the US military, the CCP has been secretly helping Iran to restore its missile production capability. And that's not all. Reuters reported in March that FMIC, a major Chinese state-owned chip manufacturer, supplied chip-making equipment to the Iranian military. The Atlantic Council also mentioned in a report at the end of March that the CCP directly supplied Iran with components produced either in the West or in China, and these components later turned up in Iranian drones used to attack US forces. So the CCP is playing both arms dealer and peacemaker. Have you ever seen a mediator who tries to broker peace while handing bullets to one of the parties involved? That's why Trump saw through all of this. Within just a few hours of the ceasefire announcement, he posted twice in quick succession. Only by looking at these two posts together can you truly understand Trump's real strategy. His first post painted a rosy picture for Iran, essentially dangling a big carrot. He said, "We'll help you clear up the remnants of your nuclear facilities, lift sanctions against you, and even offer tariff reductions." That's the reward for Iran. Then, in his second post, he warned that any country supplying Iran with military weapons would immediately face a 50% tariff on all goods sold to the United States. There are no exceptions or exemptions whatsoever. This post didn't name anyone directly, but everyone around the world knows exactly who it was aimed at. It's true that Russia has provided Iran with weapons technology, but annual trade between the US and Russia is less than $500 million, and Russia has already been sanctioned to the point where it hardly matters anymore. Even if a 50% tariff were imposed, the impact on Russia would be negligible, and America's gains would be next to nothing. North Korea's trade with the United States is zero, so the only country that would actually be hit by this 50% tariff is the Chinese Communist Party, so this second measure is a big stick aimed at the CCP. At present, Beijing is facing triple pressure. First, on 19th April, which is just over a week away, a sanctions waiver issued by the US Treasury in March will expire. What's the story behind this waiver? After the war had been going on for several weeks, the Strait of Hormuz was closed. At that time, oil prices soared, and Treasury Secretary Besson came up with a tit-for-tat solution to temporarily allow the market to purchase around 140 million barrels of Iranian crude oil that had already been loaded onto ships but was stranded at sea. The aim was to increase the supply of oil on the international market and bring down prices. Besson said, "We will use Iran's oil against Iran, push the oil price down, and at the same time continue Operation Support." However, this waiver has an expiry date, which is the 19th of April. Once it expires, all that Iranian crude floating at sea will once again become subject to US sanctions. At that point, the Chinese Communist Party will no longer be able to obtain Iranian oil under the waiver. Instead, they'll have to resort to underhanded means, using shadow teams, ghost teams, and phantom fleets to purchase Iranian oil. So, as for those in the CCP, small-scale refineries will also once again face the risk of secondary sanctions. Next, there's also the 50% weapons supply tariff that Trump has just threatened, still hanging over their heads. More crucially, in mid-May, Xi Jinping will have to face Trump, who's come in all the way from afar. What will the CCP do? Will the negotiations between the US and Iran be able to reach an ideal outcome in the end? There are only 2 weeks left. So when you look at all these signals together, you'll realise this isn't just a war against Iran, but rather a confrontation between the US and China, using Iran as a chess piece with the CCP as the ultimate target. Trump is using military force to force Iran to its knees, while simultaneously strangling the CCP economically, pushing forward on both fronts at the same time, one side towards the negotiating table in Islamabad on Saturday. The other side is pushing towards the upcoming Beijing summit. Late on Wednesday night, Trump posted that all US naval vessels, aircraft, military personnel, along with additional ammunition and weaponry, will remain around Iran until a genuinely concluded agreement is fully adhered to. He also said that if the agreement is not upheld, although this is extremely unlikely, then shooting starts and it will be bigger, fiercer and stronger than anything anyone has ever seen. So, what should we look out for next? This Saturday, Vance will lead the US delegation, including Witkoff and Kushner, to Islamabad. On the Iranian side, it is reported that the speaker will head the delegation, with the foreign minister also attending. This will be the highest level contact between the US and Iran since the start of this war. The White House has said that the negotiations may begin in the form of proximity talks, meaning both sides will be in the same city but will communicate through intermediaries. If things go smoothly, it could shift to direct talks. Over the next 2 weeks, the negotiations in Islamabad, the situation regarding the navigation of the strait, and the response from the Chinese Communist Party, each step could change the situation. I invite you to keep following along with me. If you feel that today's episode has helped you see things more clearly, and you like this kind of series where I explain all the ins and outs in 20 minutes, please give me a like, share it with your friends and family, and you're welcome to subscribe to True Perspective. I'm Shen Fei, and in our next episode, we'll be back with more perspectives. Don't miss it. Bye-bye.